5.
We begin with NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kuby, and MSNBC chief international analyst, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Admiral James Stavridis. Richard, beginning with you, John Kirby from the White House says that the assessments of the strikes are now underway. Talk about the targeting last night and how the Houthi factor will spread into this broader fight. How does it relate to what's happening in Gaza?
Well, what a group you've got with Admiral Stavridis and Courtney Kuby at the Pentagon. I can't wait to hear what they have to say as well. This was a long-anticipated move. It was anticipated, I think, even by the Houthis. And I spoke to a Houthi leader a few days ago, one of the top 3 in the command structure there, that they would face some sort of retaliation for attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea. It is such a provocative action that it was anticipated, widely anticipated that there would be a military action. And last night we saw it. And across the Arab world today, we're seeing something of a muted response. We're seeing some calls for caution, some calls for restraint, even from Saudi Arabia, which does not support the Houthis at all, supports the government that the Houthis threw out of power. Turkey has expressed some concerns, but mostly we're hearing complaints from the Houthis themselves, who promise revenge, and from Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq and Syria. But in general, across the broader Arab world, there's been a lot of silence so far, because the Arab world depends on the Red Sea for shipping, depends on the Red Sea to move oil and other commodities. So while there might be some public complaints to placate their own domestic population, we're not seeing tremendous protests on the streets in Cairo, Istanbul, and other places like that. But one thing that is critical, I think, is the public opinion war. I think it was Admiral Kirby, who you just played a moment ago, saying that there needs to be this distinction between what happened in the Red Sea and the attack on the Houthis and what's happening in Gaza. And for the Houthis and many people watching this conflict unfold on television, on stations like Al Jazeera, there is no distinction, because the Houthis themselves say what they are doing and what they have been doing and what they say they will continue doing in the Red Sea is directly related to Gaza. They say the reason they're attacking commercial ships is in order to impose a kind of blockade on Israel, the way that Israel is imposing a blockade on Gaza, something that the Biden administration disputes.
And Courtney, pick it up there. You've got the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, of course, giving his final sign-off to this from his hospital, where he's being treated for complications after prostate cancer surgery. So how did the joint operation come together? What are they saying at the Pentagon?
Yeah, that's right. So he was in the hospital. He remains there today. Andrea's complications from his prostate cancer surgery. Now, it's important to point out that the actual targets and strike options have been coming together over a matter of weeks. In fact, the White House started looking at options late in 2023. And I think the real determining factor here has been the ability for them to build a coalition. So we've been hearing this was the U.S. and the British militaries who actually took these strikes last night. But U.S. officials here have been very quick to point out that other nations supported the strikes in a non-operational capacity. That's been really key. The U.S. did not want to go this alone. And that's one of the reasons that we saw the strikes finally come together and be carried out last night. Now, Secretary Austin he was part of a video teleconference, a VTC, from Walter Reed yesterday, where they talked through these options. Generally, that would be done in person, but of course he's still hospitalized. But we have continued to hear that he has been actively engaged in these discussions. In fact, we heard from John Kirby about that just earlier this morning on MSNBC. Here's what he had to say.
He was involved actively and intimately all day yesterday with the national security team here at the White House, and of course with the commander-in-chief, with President Biden. The defense secretary is going to stay in office. The president has full faith and confidence in him.
So, and one of the other things that has taken more time to refine here, Andrea, is exactly what they wanted to go after with these strikes. There's two real goals here. One is to be able to deter the Houthis' ability to continue to carry out these very dangerous and threatening attacks against ships in the Red Sea. So they did that last night by going after warehouses, places where the Houthis are storing or even assembling things like these one-way drones, where they store their anti-ship cruise missiles and their ballistic missiles, also going after radar sites that they use for targeting, launchers that they literally launch these things from. The goal, again, to degrade their ability to continue to these now more than 24 attacks that have been carried out over the last 2 months. But in addition to that, the hope here is that this will deter. But as we heard from Richard, as frankly we've been hearing ever since last night, is the Houthis have vowed already to strike back, to retaliate from these strikes. The reality here is if they do strike back in a very serious way, continuing with large-scale attacks against shipping, we could see follow-on attacks by this alliance against more Houthi targets in Yemen. Andrea.
And Admiral, does this escalate? I was traveling with Secretary Blinken, and at every stop he was saying, we are not seeking a wider conflict, but that international shipping, these aren't even Israeli targets, international shipping has to be protected. It's 40% of the shipping goes, through those lanes, and that it is affecting already the worldwide economy as ships have to divert.
Indeed, and there is no question that the Houthis will bluster a lot. Whether they continue to attack, I think we'll know more in the next few days. Worth remembering, just under a decade ago, in 2016, the U.S. military struck Houthi targets. Very similar scenario, and the Houthis backed down. They stopped attacking shipping. If you go back to the late 1980s, Iran was blocking shipping coming out of the Arabian Gulf by mining the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Navy, in an operation Praying Mantis, it was called, destroyed about a fourth of the Iranian Navy. They got the message at that point. So we may be in for more attacks, but I know the Pentagon has more targets up their sleeve. And I do want to draw a line under the coalition aspects of this. Very important to track that. And it's not just a NATO coalition. There are Gulf nations in this, Arab nations, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific nations, as well as traditional NATO allies are involved in all of this. So the Houthis have been sent a message. It really needs to land not in Yemen, but in Tehran. And all of this, frankly, Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, they all begin with H. But the thing to remember is they're all owned and operated by Iran.
And I was going to ask you about that because we were being told by those traveling with the secretary that Iran is giving latitude to the Houthis, but is not necessarily directing these operations. What is your take? Is the Iranian regime behind this, and are they going to become involved, or are we and they going to be more drawn into this?
I think the Iranians are going to continue to press through all three of these surrogates that they've created, as well as the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. And if you laid down a map of the ancient Persian Empire over today's Middle East, you would see and could drop pins into each of these operations, essentially coming out of the grand strategy of the mullahs in Tehran. I don't see anything that's going to change that underlying fundamental, which also gets into Shia versus Sunni within the face of Islam. So look for more challenges. And unfortunately, this latest turn of the wheel, to me, raises the chances for wider regional conflict. Again, let's hope the Houthis and their masters in Tehran get the message that was sent last night.
What are you seeing, Richard, from your perspective in terms of Hezbollah in the north, what's happening in the West Bank? Of course, that's more of an internal problem within Israel because of some of the aggressions by the Israeli settlers. But what about Iran as well?
So it's interesting, Andrea. There isn't really an internal issue and an external issue right now because we are in the age of social media, the age where everyone can exchange information, some of it false information, some of it deliberately distorted, some of it accurate, obviously. We haven't seen much from Hezbollah today. We didn't see a rain of missiles coming down from the north. But I've been speaking to several Arab leaders, senior Arab leaders and analysts across the region. And what they're concerned about is that the United States, others, are going to be increasingly accused of hypocrisy, that they will not do much to stand up for the lives of Palestinians. They will continue to veto resolutions calling for a ceasefire, but they will act immediately to protect global shipping, that Palestinians don't matter as much as cargo ships. And there is the concern that if this continues, that reality could spread among ordinary people across the region, and that could lead to this bigger conflict that Admiral Stavridis was just talking about between Sunnis and Shias, and who has legitimacy here. Is it the people who are standing up for Palestinian rights, or those who are standing up for shipping in the Red Sea?
And of course, there have also been attacks by Iran-backed militias against U.S. forces in both Iraq and Syria. So there's already been a lot, and criticism on the Hill that there hasn't been enough deterrence. But finally, after a lot of warning and a lot of signaling and telegraphing, it happened last night. Admiral, thank you so much, Admiral James Stavridis. Richard Engel, Courtney Kuby, who's been on duty straight through, as have Richard. It's been a long night. Thank you both very much.